From Wall Street to Main Street to help small business owners have the same capital as corporate America and give them the same resources as a larger company. We cover business funding, business credit, scaling, business consulting, and much more. Check out the website at shieldadvisorygroup.com. Welcome to the show, The Liquid Lunch Project.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Liquid Lunch Project. I am Matthew R. Meehan, alongside my partner, the professor, Luigi Rosabianca. What's on tap today, Lou?
Matt, do you know most small business owners are racked by the fear of making mistakes? But there's another side to that coin. Sometimes making a mistake could be a godsend, right? It'll teach you how to fix operations. It'll teach you how to fix processes. Maybe you can even improve. And that goes not only for the business itself, but also goes for our personal relationships and how we manage the business. So today on the podcast, we've got someone special, Mark Graban. Now, Mark is an author, speaker, consultant, and he has just written the newly minted The Mistakes That Make Us. And we are excited to have you on, Mark. Please tell us, how do small and medium-sized business owners learn from their mistakes, and how can these mistakes become a safety zone as opposed to a no-fly zone?
Yeah. Well, thank you both for having me. There's so much I think we're going to dig into here, but I think, the high-level answer is, this reminder. I think it's something we all know, but look, we all make mistakes. Every organization makes mistakes. What's optional is learning from them. Right. So when we have an environment where, I think first off, it starts with ourselves. And I've tried to be better about this. Can I admit mistakes to myself first and foremost? Can I react in a way where I'm not beating myself up? And can I be focused on, like, what am I learning? How do I prevent a repeat of that mistake? Like, if I can do that on an individual level, I think I've got a chance then to do that within a team. Or if I'm a leader, can I admit mistakes? I work a lot with a tech company, software company called KaiNexus, where the CEO, one of the co-founders, Greg Jacobson, is really good about admitting mistakes, right? I mean, he's a confident guy. He's an ER doctor. He's not afraid to make decisions. He makes life-saving decisions. He still works a couple of shifts a month. But he's also humble enough to say things like, hey, I was wrong about that. Or to ask for input, like, I might be wrong. So here, help challenge me on that. Or let's go test a small idea and learn from it so we can prevent a big mistake. Like, he's really good about that.
Now, Mark, let's develop that, because an ER doctor who makes a mistake is very different than, let's say, maybe your bookkeeper that put something wrong on the left side of the ledger versus the right side of the ledger. Right?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that kind of mistake? I mean, do you compartmentalize in a way where, look, it happened, it'll never happen again, and hey, this is the cost of doing business? Or are there real emotional downsides to those kind of mistakes?
Oh, I mean, there are huge emotional downsides. Like, one of my guests on the My Favorite Mistake podcast was an anesthesiologist who told a story, why was this his favorite mistake? Like, he observed and witnessed when he was a resident, meaning, he was still in training, a resident surgeon cut into the wrong side of the patient. So that's a more meaningful left hand, right hand compared to a balance sheet or a ledger. So then the attending surgeon comes in the room, discovers this, and then they cut into the correct side, they stitch up. And then what Dr. David Mayer was talking about then, like, he was in a recovery room with the patient, again, as an anesthesiologist. And the patient said to him, like, quite happily, hey, doc, it's my lucky day. I got 2 surgeries for the price of 1. Like, who would ever believe that? If they found 2 hernias, they're going to charge you for 2 hernias, And so Dr. Mayer said his mistake was not speaking up. Like, he kind of went along with the deception. Now, to be fair to him, like, he probably wouldn't have gotten a lot of trouble for speaking up. Like, he didn't have the safety to be candid and honest for a lot of reasons.
Well, let's talk about that, Mark. It's one thing to be internally open with your team about mistakes, but in America, we're in such a litigious society that you can't admit to making a mistake because the outcome could be 10 times worse than the mistake itself.
Well, here's the rub, though. Like in healthcare, I think it's really well proven that when a doctor or a surgeon admits a mistake to the patient or the family, they're less likely to be sued. Like
Really?
a lot of the lawsuits come out of frustration where people know something went wrong and they're like, oh, we're being stonewalled. You're not being honest with us. It's not even so much about whatever money, but it's like, damn it, we want to know the truth. So we're going to sue to get that. I think sometimes people are understanding when it's an honest mistake. Like if they had told that patient, we made a mistake, we made an incision on the wrong side, we stitched it up. I think people might be upset, but forgiving.
I don't know. I in my opinion, I think people, they hear the word doctor say mistake and dollar signs light up in their eyeballs. And then, Uncle Joe gets the attorney on the phone.
No, but Matt, that's an American anomaly. Like it's a cultural thing. I think it was like 25 years ago, there was a tragic Korean airline accident. And then they did the study that they always do afterwards. They do the investigation. They realized one of the causes of the accident was the co-pilot felt subservient to tell the pilot that he was making a mistake. Mm-hmm. Like the respect for your elders and your seniors are so inculcated in society where even though he saw himself making a mistake and they were nosediving, he still wouldn't reach the heights of telling his pilot that you're making a mistake.
Wow.
Aviation has done a lot, thankfully. As somebody who flies a lot, I'm very, very, very thankful, and for everybody else. Aviation has really done a lot to try to change that cockpit culture. But you're right, Lou. There are differences in what they call like that power differential and deferral to authority in different cultures. And this is particularly true in Asian cultures, it seems. But, we can work on that. And I've seen settings where airline pilot friend of mine does training in hospitals, and I've gotten to sit in on this. And what they do is brilliant. So like, they're not just lecturing the nurses in the operating room. Like, you should speak up. Good people speak up. You should be courageous. Sometimes the surgeons need to be less of an asshole and be open and not yell or throw things when someone challenges them. But what I love is like, they're trying to influence the surgeons to be open to being challenged. Easier said than done in some cases, but they teach people how to speak up, right? So they might say, Dr. Smith, you're addressing them, getting their attention respectfully. I have a concern, which is a fact-based statement. State what the concern is. I don't think we have enough units of blood on hand to start this procedure. Make a recommendation. I recommend we wait until we get more blood from the blood bank. So hopefully the reaction is either, oh gosh, you're right, I didn't notice, we'll wait, we'll get the blood, or the concern is alleviated by the surgeon saying, well, thank you for bringing that up, but for a patient of this size and this weight, we only need 2 units of blood. I think we're actually okay to carry forth, right? So that takes maturity to have that kind of interaction. But if someone says, I have a concern, like, it's not really fair to say, no, you don't. Let's address it. Let's work on it, because we're all trying to protect the surgeon from cutting into the wrong side of the patient, because to what you said earlier, that can be personally and professionally devastating, even if somebody didn't die as a result. So we need to learn from mistakes and near misses to help prevent the things that might really hurt or kill a patient. And healthcare still needs to do better at that.
It's true, just not in life and death situations, but as a leader of a business or a founder or a small business owner, you have to actually empower your people to speak up, because the newest people on the job may be timid and not feel like they can. When we're working with our team here, I tell everybody, I want to hear your opinions. Tell me what you have, right? So as a matter of fact, in our business the other day, we had a little bit of an issue. Things weren't going according to the SOP. And I said, why is this not happening? Well, if you want me to do it that way, I'll do it that way. I go, no, I didn't ask you that. I asked you, why is this happening? Fair. Because I want to see what you're doing, because if it's a more optimal SOP, we're going to move it that way. Yes. Right? So we can try it. So you have to give people permission to try things and permission to fail, and not hold them or berate them if that failure happens.
Right. Absolutely. No, I love that. And where the rubber meets the road is, when you encourage people to speak up, then how are you reacting? Right. My wife, is a senior leader at GE Aerospace, and I'll give credit to their CEO, Larry Culp. I saw him speak at a conference like year and a half ago, and he talked about coming in. He was the first ever outsider CEO ever hired in like 125 years. Crazy, right? So he's an outsider. He had been hugely successful at another company, Danaher, but the culture he had built at Danaher was different than what he walked into at GE. And he realized pretty quickly, this is a shoot the messenger culture. And that needs to change. And so he was talking at the conference, he had to encourage people. I want to hear the bad news. I want to hear it faster. So that's one thing. You got to encourage people, but people might say, oh, bullshit. Yeah. Because they've worked there. Like, yeah, I've heard this before, but I don't know. I don't trust this new guy. But then and then as Larry said in the speech, something like the moment of truth is when you hear that bad news, can you react I'm paraphrasing, but can you react in a constructive way instead of just getting angry about it? And so, my wife sees him actually walking that walk on a daily basis, right? You can't just encourage it. You can't just say it at a conference. Like he's trying to shape that culture, but it takes time. Like we see at KaiNexus, Matthew, you're talking about somebody might be timid. We hire people who had experience at other companies where they did get punished for challenging the status quo. And we could try to tell them in interviewing and orientation, like we encourage people to speak up and do the things that you were talking about. That doesn't mean they'll believe it or change their habits like flipping a light switch. Like they might see, okay, gosh, people I'm working with do challenge things and they're doing okay. I'm going to try. And they're going to see if that gets rewarded or not. And generally it does get rewarded. But that's one challenge of bringing somebody into a new culture. You've got to give them time to feel their own sense of psychological safety. You can't just say, hey, this is a safe place. You need to speak up,
I started my career on Wall Street. I was there and I was on the trading floor for a long time. And one time, trader made a mistake. He bought the wrong stock. He didn't tell anybody for 3 days until the margin call was due because he was trying to get himself out of the position. And it was a very big financial hit to the firm. But it's because he didn't speak up but we did find strategies to, minimize the hit itself. But overall, if he would have spoke up, we could have figured out something a little bit earlier. But it was that type of environment where you don't speak up about your mistakes. You're not encouraged to.
But also, Mark, in Matt's firm's defense, we're talking late 80s, 90s, and there was a little bit more of that chest thumping, rah culture where if somebody would have spoke up, it may have been interpreted as a sign of weakness.
Which leads me to my next question for you. When do you think this speaking up and culture started to change inside of companies? Because if we look back to the 50s and the 60s, it wasn't really there. The 70s, the 80s, where did you see a pivot point when people really started speaking up?
That's a great question because I think it's still an ongoing challenge. I've worked
it's become more common.
It has
in the last 10 years. I would say.
Amy Edmondson, through her book, The Fearless Organization and other publications, there's certainly a lot more discussion about psychological safety. But as with anything, like the work that I do that's sometimes framed as lean manufacturing or lean management, people hear those words and then they learn a little bit and then they start jumping into a bunch of conclusions and it's things like this can't be mandated, so sometimes a little bit of discussion doesn't really move the needle on the culture, or it can be counterproductive. I've been in one work setting, not KaiNexus, where I think it was frustrating, if not counterproductive, when leaders would encourage people to, they would say things like, well, hey, remember psychological safety. Like, okay, what does that mean? Like I'm more cognizant that I don't feel safe speaking up here compared to speaking up at KaiNexus. I'm the same person in two different settings. And I think that's an important lesson, right? It's so situational. I think this challenge, we're still fighting this battle where I think talking about psychological safety is a great first step. Then we need to make sure we're all on the same page about what that means. And then thirdly, like, what are the things we can practically do so that it's not just hopes and dreams of, puppy dogs and unicorns and kumbaya. Now we're psychologically safe. Like, we got to take practical steps. I hope we're moving in a good direction. Like, there's different trends around, we don't hear the phrase the great resignation as much, or the challenges in hiring people. Like, I think culture is a powerful differentiator. Like, if you're fighting for talent, like in Austin, where KaiNexus is based, your culture becomes a really important, kind of appeal of, well, it's not only what type of work do I want to do, but what environment do I want to do it in? I think when you have a culture of psychological safety, people are going to perform better. They're going to feel better about themselves. They're more likely to stay in the company.
What about larger companies? Because you've worked at a lot of them.
Yeah.
What about when they make mistakes, right? And they don't usually come out and admit them. I feel like the companies that come out and say, hey, we made a mistake, their stock prices recover a lot faster. I kind of like it when they make mistakes, because in my opinion, I'm a trader at heart. And I know most people have short-term memories. And if they have a great product, it's going to go back higher. So I'll buy the stock.
Yeah, buy on the dip.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Boeing stock has taken a hit, with their problem most recently, with that 737 MAX flight. And, as the initial NTSB report indicates, and it's funny, this first off started as an internet rumor that a Boeing employee supposedly had posted on some news story. I mean, it turns out to be pretty true, that somebody didn't put those 4 bolts back on the door plug. I think I would call that an organizational failure. Like, I heard sometimes a news report, like even NPR, which is so calm about things, they talked about this, and it's unclear yet who didn't reinstall the bolts. And I'm like, oh, let's stop the blame game, right? This is a team effort. And, there's a lot of fault to be found, I think, within what's described around the Boeing culture. I'll give the Boeing CEO, Dave Calhoun, credit for speaking in pretty plain language of saying, Boeing, we made mistakes here. This was our fault, not blaming the supplier, taking responsibility. But the FAA put out a report the other day that said, there's this culture of people being afraid to speak up. There are stories in the news of people saying, I was retaliated against for pointing out quality problems. Like that kind of points to it's not who screwed up. Like, firing one mechanic isn't going to solve the problem at Boeing.
Well, I think people are just afraid to speak up across the board, especially in some of these larger companies. I mean, if you see what's going on with Disney, when people speak up, they're firing actors. There's a lot of things out here. So it's like that cancel culture. They're going to cancel you out and get you out of the company if you don't align with ideals that they believe in. So
that's happening in a lot of different types of companies. And it's sad. I'm not a trader. I'm not a stock picker. I would be bearish on companies that had a lot of reports about people being fired for speaking up. But so that company, they might be successful enough now, but that's a real risk for their future.
Yeah, 100%. So how did this book come about? Tell us what inspired this. What's the origin story behind writing this book for you?
I mean, thanks. Yeah. The origin story for the book, The Mistakes That Make Us, is kind of baked into the origin story of a podcast that I started September 2020 called My Favorite Mistake. And, in that podcast, I just released episode 250. I've had a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, athletes, entertainers, 2 congressmen, who were currently couldn't believe they were willing to talk about a mistake.
That's awesome.
Talking to a lot of people where I asked,
no dead air on that podcast.
No, but they were both great about owning, and that's the tone, and what's meant to be positive about the podcast and the book is a reminder to everyone, like even people who are really at the pinnacle of success in their profession, they still make mistakes. Episode 1, Kevin Harrington, who was one of the sharks on season 1 of Shark Tank, he told a story about how he almost bankrupted his infomercial company. And he didn't blame anybody else. He took ownership for sort of the structural, flaw in his business that jeopardized his cash flow for the entire business because of quality problems with one of those infomercial products. he admitted it, he learned from it, he made changes, so that I'm not going to repeat that mistake again. And so I found those stories to be so inspiring. And then after some time, I'm like, there's some patterns. I think there's some lessons learned. So the book is both a compilation of stories from a lot of podcast guests, plus stories from my own career and from a lot of examples from KaiNexus about how do we build a culture of learning and innovation. That's really what the book is about. So at first I thought like, yeah, I'll stitch together a bunch of stories from the podcast guests, which is great. But then my editor encouraged me, to start building in some of my own stories and advice, kind of expanding on what the people said on the podcast.
Mark, I think the boys over at FIFA in Switzerland, the governing body of soccer, probably are listening to your podcast and reading your book. Next season, they are changing the rules a bit. They're taking a page from the hockey playbook. And instead of going to a direct red card when someone makes a mistake, they're going to give a blue card. And the blue card means you sit out for 10 minutes. Huh. So you have 10 minutes to contemplate your mistake.
And the team's a man down for those 10 minutes?
The team's a man down. So your teammates hate you. The coach wants to kill you. But you get to redeem yourself 10 minutes later. Huh. What's your spin on that?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I'm a huge sports fan. And, I don't know. I'm not really a soccer fan, but like with a red card, like that's meant to be egregious. Or you think of like NBA, a flagrant 2 foul. Like I grew up watching the Pistons and Celtics beat the crap out of each other in the playoffs in the late 80s.
Yeah, but late 80s. But today they'd be serving 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, players dragging each other down by the neck and body slamming them. And okay, 2 free throws. I mean, there's partly a question of like what's a mistake versus what's a bad decision or what has bad intent. Like you can never really know the intent. Like look at baseball. Oh, that pitch slipped and hit a guy in the back. That could have been a mistake, or it could have been intentional because someone else got hit the inning before. It's tough because I think learning from mistakes and psychological safety, again, like it doesn't mean no accountability. So I don't know. Like there's these judgment calls. I'd be curious to know, does the 10-minute timeout or the penalty box, does it have the same effect of discouraging, an illegal tackle or something that would otherwise earn a red card? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, let's apply it to small business. Going back to the earlier analogy with the bookkeeper keeps putting the right side of the ledger on the left side.
Yeah.
What if that person does that continuously?
Right.
And there is a psychological safety zone. So she's able to, go back to her supervisor and say, hey, look, I'm making this mistake. I don't know why, but it keeps happening.
Right.
At what point is there's too much safety?
I would frame it a little differently because like the one thing I'm always fascinated by is, let's say in the case of trading the wrong stock or putting something on the wrong side of the ledger, like how can that happen? And I think back to industrial engineering and lessons from Toyota of how do you mistake proof something? And it's probably got to be better than like if you're doing the work on a computer, something that pops up and says, are you sure? Right? Because we can get blind to that and just click yes, and in healthcare, they call this alarm fatigue, which is, a different human failing that we're all susceptible to. But I think if a mistake's being repeated, we've got to go back to SOPs or mistake proofing approaches and saying, well, how can we double check? How can we prevent? How can we automate? There are times though where like maybe somebody just isn't a good fit for a particular role or job. That's a different determination. But I think if you look at repeated mistakes, then there's a question of are different people making that same mistake? Is it too easy to make that mistake? And I wouldn't call that too much safety. To me, that's thinking more like an engineer of, how do we look at the system and design a system that's robust against human error, which I think is more effective than saying, hey, humans, You need to be perfect and infallible. Don't commit human error. We've got to look at how do we prevent it.
Yeah, but if it's the same employee making not just the same mistake on one application, but multiple applications, and then you start to see habits forming,
Yeah,
right? And then you have to either let them go or find another seat for them in the house.
I would agree. I think as long as just, the first reaction isn't one of, oh, you made one mistake, mistakes are unacceptable, you're fired. And I think when companies do that, you bring in a new person. It might be a matter of time. It depends on the mistake, right? And I think we go through and look at, is it a matter of competence or human error? We're all susceptible to human error. That's why, in healthcare, for example, like giving the wrong medication to a patient could kill somebody. Trading the wrong stock has a financial cost. But, there are systems put in place, around barcode scanning. If you're in the hospital, you have a wristband. For one, you got to make sure they put the correct wristband on you and not a different Luigi Rosa Bianca, with a different birth date. But make sure that wristband has the correct barcode. And if a nurse is going to give you a medication, you want to see them literally in front of you, scanning the container that the medication is in, scanning your wristband, because the electronic medical records should flag and beep, hey, there's a mismatch here. To me, that's the type of systemic mistake proofing that can be really beneficial, instead of just telling nurses, hey, don't give the wrong medication. And if you do, you're going to get fired. And there are some egregious cases where, nurses have been not just fired, they've not just lost their license, they've been prosecuted and criminally convicted.
Really?
Which that's vengeance. To me, that's not justice. And, we that's not a mistake I would celebrate. Right. If we're a startup and we're trying to be innovative and we have a new marketing campaign and we're trying to be edgy or innovative and it just didn't work, okay, we can celebrate that. Like process-based mistakes are different, where I wouldn't celebrate the medication error, but I would sure as hell want to learn from it. And I think when we punish people, again, like there are unfortunately too many ways where that trader was trying to hide or cover up a mistake. People in healthcare, and a lot of times, can hide or cover up a mistake a way Boeing could not. Like, there were a couple hundred witnesses to that door plug flying out. There's no hiding or covering that up. But there's still a lot of opportunity for, trying to prevent mistakes. But then when they happen, let's be constructive about it and make sure we learn from them instead of just punishing people.
Mark, do you think that your background as an industrial engineer, which by definition probably involves a lot of tinkering, do you think that led to you being the master of mistakes?
It certainly did. And I think it was not just, I think in industrial engineering education, you're taught to think about systems. So the Institute of Industrial Engineers renamed itself the Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers. Industrial engineering sounds like a really dusty, old academic discipline. Industrial. We're not industrial anymore. But the lessons apply in a lot of settings. So you're taught to think about systems. And then I think influences, I started at General Motors. We were desperately trying to learn from Toyota in the mid 90s about things like mistake proofing. And, I think those lessons have really driven me to try to bring those principles, especially into healthcare, more deeply. And there are other lessons, I think, from Toyota around trying to engage people in improvement and not being, in what I call the engineer trap or the expert trap of like, well, I'm the specialist who has been sent in to solve your problem for you. Like that doesn't always, it's not going to lead to the best solution. It doesn't lead to the most sustainable solution. Instead of, I've tried to be more of a facilitator and less of an expert, in working with people in different settings.
Mark, do you see a future, and this is a bit of a stretch, but only you can answer this. Do you see a future in AI in trying to anticipate mistakes so we can address potential mistakes before they happen? And let me give you one example. I tend to like Formula One.
Mhm.
And these Formula One cars are revolutionized every year because somebody gets hurt, an accident happens, and then the next year they change the design to prevent the accident from happening.
Good.
And this has been going on for 60 years. Why can't we anticipate that design so no one gets hurt?
That's a great question. And as much potential there is an AI, and as fun as it can be to play around with that in different ways, or productive to play around with it, there's still a lot of opportunity for old human intelligence, right? So going back to engineering disciplines, and I touch on this in the book, we can be proactive in trying to anticipate. I think humans are good at thinking through a process. So like at KaiNexus, one of the things I do is manage and produce a webinar series every month. And when Greg, the co-founder, and I were doing those webinars together like a decade ago, we put together a checklist, kind of like what a pilot might use in the cockpit or a surgeon increasingly might use in the operating room, even though the stakes of a webinar mishap are trivial, right? But we could anticipate and think through mistakes we might make. And like one of those mistakes would be like, forget to hit record. Well, now we're using the Zoom, and I've done that once as a podcast host.
I've done that too, sir.
Yeah, I can admit that. We can
halfway through a
commiserate.
podcast.
Yeah, but there are things you can do, like Zoom webinars. You can set it to automatically start recording when you start the webinar. Now that creates the need to edit out maybe some of the pre stuff, but that that mistake of forgetting to edit out the upfront chit chat probably isn't as bad as forgetting to record the webinar altogether. So that would be an example of like a systemic fix. So we can be proactive and think about, here's the things that could go wrong. How do we prevent it? How do we mitigate it? But I'll tell you, as time goes on, we invent new mistakes to make with the webinars. And so the checklist gets updated, right? So we can be proactive from our experience or anticipating what could go wrong. But then we can also be reactive and let that checklist be a living document over time. I think that's something people could use in their own workplace. Create a checklist. Don't worry about it being the perfect checklist. Let the checklist evolve as you keep doing the work. You either identify or make new mistakes. That's an item for the checklist. Because again, there's certain mistakes we really need to try to prevent. But again, like if we're trying to be innovative, we can't be so afraid of making a mistake that we never try to do things new or to do things in a new way. But we can certainly learn from mistakes and not repeat them. But I've gotten in trouble. Here's the other tip. You have to follow the damn checklist. Like I have repeated a mistake because I got cocky or lax or distracted. And I haven't made that mistake in a while. And then like, it's not that the checklist failed me. It's that I didn't let the checklist save me.
But isn't that human nature though?
Yeah. We're all human. We make mistakes, especially when we're, fatigued, hungry, distracted, upset, what have you.
I mean, listen, this is commonplace for me. I used to beat myself up when I was a kid. When we played sports, I'd miss a basketball shot and it would destroy me for the whole game. I just didn't want to take another shot. I was just still mad at myself.
Yeah.
And when I got to Wall Street, I realized, taking losses is part of the game. But I constantly make mistakes on a daily basis. As a matter of fact, I did it this morning. I was supposed to bring my neighbor's kid to school with us when I was dropping my daughter off. My wife calls me and asks me, did you bring him to school? I'm like, shit, I made a mistake. I'm on my way back.
Yeah. How'd she react to that?
She's not as good as reacting as I am.
I just moved forward.
Our wives were never Korean co-pilots.
Like a couple of weeks ago, I managed to scrape the side of our SUV. I still don't know exactly how I hit the base for like a security arm that goes up. I somehow cut the corner too tight and I heard this noise. I'm like, what the hell happened? And I still don't quite understand the physics. It's not like I hit it with the front right of the vehicle. It was like the rear right passenger side door. I still don't understand how I did it. So I was pissed at myself. It's mainly my wife's vehicle that she loves. I don't want to say I was scared, but I wasn't happy about calling and saying, hey, this happened. And, maybe because as an executive, she deals with things that are far higher stakes. She was actually very calm about it and said basically she wasn't happy about it. I get to deal with the body shop and insurance and all that stuff that's a time suck. But she said, and I appreciate it, she said, it was an accident. Like she knew I wasn't trying to F up the vehicle and that, like I'll be more careful for a while, but that we'll see if that's a lasting effect. Like, it's not like I'm getting in accidents all the time, but God, like I had to not beat myself up over that. We can acknowledge the impact of a mistake, I think, without dwelling on it too much. Maybe I'm dwelling on it a little bit now. Sorry.
No, listen, I think you got to recognize it. You got to think about it, but I think you also have to let it go, right? The more real estate it takes up in your mind, the less productive you're going to be in any other areas of your life, especially in small business when you're trying to move forward every day.
Yeah.
Dwelling on it's just going to hold you back.
Well, and that's where I think trying to react to a mistake in a way that acknowledges the impact, gives someone a little bit of space to recover from feeling bad about it, and then moving into a forward-looking mode of, okay, what did we learn from this? What can we change about our approach? How can we mistake-proof this? I think putting that focus on, like, how are we going to make it better is a nice distraction from looking backward, right?
Wait,
So I, like in the book, I try to distinguish between like a nice reaction and a kind reaction. So let's say if I've made a mistake and the boss says things like, oh, it's okay. Don't feel bad. I know you didn't mean to do it, blah, 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 blah. And if that's the end of story, I might still keep dwelling on it. Where I think like a kind reaction is more action oriented, where you still might say, I know you didn't mean to do it. Please don't feel bad, but let's figure out how to prevent it from happening again. Like, I think that helps us recover, because now we're helping the organization get better instead of just dwelling on what we might have done wrong.
Wait a second. You're supposed to learn from these things?
Yeah. Yeah. And, part of my lesson learned is that, coming in through that gate, I have a choice of like, do you go straight or you turn right? I think I'm never going to turn right again. I'm going to go straight and then I'm not going to hit that damn box on the side of the road. So that's an adjustment to my SOP, if you will. Because like there's what I call the be careful effect. Like when somebody makes a mistake, they're going to feel bad. They're going to be really cognizant of it. But I think that wears off over time. Where, there's an old story going back to Thomas Watson, the founder of IBM, where somebody supposedly made a $400,000 mistake, which is probably like $3 billion in today's money or something. And, and Watson said something to the effect of like, well, why would I fire that person and give the benefit of that expensive education to some other company? I mean, we invested in that learning. Let's keep the benefit of it. And, again, like if somebody makes a mistake, they're, posting signs that say like, be careful. Hey, remember not to trade the wrong stock. Like things like that just aren't effective.
Mark, thank you so much for being here. We want to be respectful of your time. Can you tell everybody where they can find the book and where they can reach out to you online and on the socials? Yeah,
well, thank you. And thanks for, a fun conversation, and appreciate the great questions here. People can find more about the book at mistakesbook.com. If they're interested in the book, but they're afraid it might be a bit of a mistake, they can download a free preview, mistakesbook.com/chapter. And then if they want to check out the My Favorite Mistake podcast, they can go to mistakespodcast.com. And then my general website is markgraban.com.
Hey, Mark, by the way, would you mind staying on? We have to re-record this. Matthew forgot to press the record button, but because this is a safe space, Matthew,
I made a mistake.
Don't feel bad, buddy.
I think I can react constructively if that were the bad news. But I'll tell you, look, I mentioned earlier, I forgot to hit record once. This was back in the day of Skype and separate piece of software, and I had to manually click record. I fessed up to it. Like I reached out, and I don't remember which guest it was. Like I could have claimed technical problems or made up some excuse, but it's not really my style. I basically said, hey, I forgot to hit record. And I wish I could remember who it was, because they were so gracious. They were like, okay, well, we'll call that a practice session. Let's do it again. Like, and I appreciated that. And then maybe about a year ago, I was on the opposite end of that similar thing where a host forgot to hit record, and I tried to pay it back and be just as gracious, again, in the spirit of like, look, things happen, we make mistakes. Let's learn from it. I'm not going to beat someone up for that. We recorded it again. Hopefully I was better on the second try.
Mark, thank you so much. Everybody, that's a wrap of the Liquid Lunch Project. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the show. And make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you on the next episode of the Liquid Lunch Project.